Hi, in this video I wanted to show you how to bake new textures to your hair or add additional bake passes. So by default, Hair tool is using this default material. You can change this using Ctrl-Shift-H, edit profile, and in here you have option to change material. And this material is using the texture node with hair strip depth texture. I can load this in here, and in the RGB channel it has the depth pass, and in the alpha channel it has the transparency. So if you want to change this texture or add additional big passes, there are two ways to make it. First, I will show you the old way, slightly longer. So just click open baking scene, and this will show the pop-up. Current file will be closed without saving. If you want, you can cancel this, go file save, and then click open OK. And this will load the baking setup. On the left we have the hair systems that will be baked into the texture, and on the right we have the hair cards where the bake result will be loaded for the preview. And in the bottom we have the preview material, and in the bottom we have the preview for the texture. So in here you can just select a bunch of passes, select the output path and press bake. I won't actually adjust the textures, the hair themselves. We'll just bake new passes. So I will switch to the cycles view and show you the bake passes that are available. So this is the ambient occlusion, diffuse pass, opacity, normal map, root map, random ID, random color, flow map, directional, and depth. And you can shift click to bake multiple passes. So I will shift click on the opacity and then shift click on the root. And I would say this is the minimal good looking setup. I will now select the output path and then accept. You can change the bake pass name. So for example, if I change this to anything else, this will be the base name for that texture. And the add-on will automatically add the suffix corresponding to the bake pass. You can change the resolution, the quality, the file format. You can change padding to fixed value. You can change background to transparent if you want. And then just press bake and wait a few seconds. After this is done, it should load the textures into the preview on the right. So you see this is the result on the flat hair cards. I will switch the viewport to EV so it is easier to see. And let's jump to the settings maybe of those haircuts. So this is made from 3 subsystems. First one is for long hair, so this is the one you see. Then there is second short hair preview. And finally there is the filter system. So in here we are just applying some noise and UVs to the strands generated above. And this hair system is using the preview bake material. So in here we have a bunch of texture nodes where the bake result is loaded. We did not bake any diffuse, so this is empty. The same is true for ambient occlusion, no texture, but I selected the root map. So let's preview this, and maybe I will load this to the side in here and switch the preview mode to color and alpha. So this is the preview of the root map. Then it is fed to the color ramp where you can colorize the strands. Then it is going to the mix multiply node. In here I can increase factor, and let's preview the result. This is just multiplying the gradient with the depth pass from the bottom. And finally, this is now linked to the base color input in the principal shader. We have then something like this. We have a bunch of available passes on the top. You can mix them in any way you want. Then we have the opacity pass. It is linked to the alpha channel. Then we have the normal pass. And currently I did not bake a normal pass. That's why also the hair is a bit dark. So if you did not bake it normal, then disconnect the normal input. So now the shading is correct. Or let's maybe connect this back, and I will bake the normal pass. So I will select the normal map, bake, wait 1 second, and now you see the normal is loaded. However, it is still not looking correct. It is because the normal map color space should be set to non-color. So now this is working correctly. And the same thing is true about the directional and flow map. Both of them should be set to non-color. So let's bake maybe the flow map. Wait a few seconds. The bake is done. So this flow map is then connected to the flow to tangent node and then linked to the tangent input. And the tangent is driving the anisotropic highlights direction, except we cannot see the anisotropic highlights in the EV. So I will switch to the cycles, disconnect the base color, make it darker so it is easier to see the highlights. I will press Shift A and add some light so it will be easier to see the highlights. And now you see this is the anisotropic highlight. If I set the anisotropic strength to 0, we have kind of render looking highlights. And okay, so now the question is how to load those textures to your character. You would probably want to bake this, save this bake setup before closing it. So go to the file, save this probably in the folder that your character is. This would be the best idea. And just switch to the character folder, to the character blend file. And we will switch to the shading viewport in the default hair material for the material that your hair is using. Just we will add new textures. So first in the UV image editor, we will go to the image, open, then navigate to the output bake folder, select a bunch of passes. With shift click you can select multiple textures, and let's duplicate the first default texture node. I will switch the texture maybe to the root map. Let's preview the root map also in the side. And now let's connect this root map to the albedo. It may be hard to see, so I will disconnect the other inputs. And it does not look like it is working. It should colorize the hair strands in the black and white gradient. And the reason is it is not working. We did not connect the UVs generated from hair tool. So it is important to know to connect the UV generated from the hair tool to the texture UV input. Now we have the correct gradient generated, so we can repeat the steps. I could add the duplicate the node, select the alpha opacity pass, connect this to the alpha input in the shader, and then again remember to connect the UV data. So now it is looking incorrectly without the UVs connected. Now let's wait for the compilation of the shader. Now it is working correctly. And if you do not want to use this hair tool default hair shader, you can press Shift A, search for principal shader, connect this principal shader to the material output, and connect the alpha to the alpha input, connect the color to the base color. On top of that we could add the colorize color ramp, connect color ramp like that, and you could add and change color to your liking. And maybe lastly I will add the normal map pass. So again I will duplicate the texture node, connect the UV input, switch the texture to the normal, and remember normal map should use the non-color color space, and do not connect the color directly to the normal input. This is not correct. You should first add the normal map node, then connect color to color, and normal map node to normal. This is the correct setup. And this is the first way of how you can work with the baking system. Okay, so now I will show you the faster way of working with baking setup. So go to the hair bake panel and click import baking scene. This will import baking hair scene into current file. Press OK. And now you see that the baking scene is loaded. And in the scene list, you can see the new imported scene and the default one. You can switch to your character scene at any time. And this also requires you to change the workspace. So the default one was the layout. Now we are in the place we started from, but this takes 2 clicks to switch between those two and then switch workspace. So I made this switch baking scene button. This will now take just 1 click to switch from between those. Okay, let's bake maybe a few texture passes. I will select the output path and press bake. And now, since this baking scene is loaded to your character scene, character file, all of those textures will be automatically available to your character. So let's preview the bake result. And one way to transfer those textures quickly would be to just box select all the texture nodes from the preview material, then press Ctrl C, switch to the main scene. Let's jump to the shading, and in the hair tool default material or in your hair material, just press Ctrl V to paste the bake result. And now just remember to connect the UVs so that those textures are correctly mapped. And let's preview the maybe root map. And this is working correctly. Just remember that if we did not bake the diffuse, we have no texture in here. And another way of working would be to just copy the preview material to your hair. So let's jump to the baking scene, and we'll copy the preview material name, switch to the main scene, and in here, to change the material on the hair, jump to the hair system, profile settings, and in here, let's paste the preview material name. Now this is using the same material as in the preview. And let's load this also in the shader editor. Okay, so we have one ugly shading issue in this spot, and usually this is caused by bad normals. And if I jump to the normal node, texture node, you see that the color space is set to sRGB, and it should be non-color for normals. And you see the issue is gone. The same thing is true for the directional or for the flow map. And lastly, in the bottom of the preview bake material, now you have also access to the character creator hair shader. This is working quite similar to character creator hair shader, but there is lots of settings, so maybe I will make another video about this one. As you can see, it is quite huge. Okay, so I will show you now the baking setup. Let's maximize the 3D view, and I will remove all the objects with hair system on the left, so it will be easier to understand with one object only. And basically, if you go at using 0 on the numerical keyboard, we maybe enable screencast keys. So if you use 0 on numerical keyboard, you will be moved to the camera that will be used for baking. So you want to place all your hair cards around this area. And let's see how this setup on the right is working. If I disable modifiers, you see we have just this subdivided plane from which the hair system is spawned from. I will show you how this is built. So we'll go to the hair system, subsystems, and we have 4 subsystems. We can disable one by one, and this is how it is built. We will create this maybe from scratch. So we'll remove 2 of them. Let's disable the finalize, and let's jump to the first system. And the idea behind the first system is to have only single strand in here. Later it will be clear why is that helpful. But for now I will just reduce the density, and then there is no easy way to move the strands in procedural way, so I will just change the seed In my case, actually, this was quite easy, but you may want to play with the seed value and density until you have strands close to the center, something like this. Soon it will be clear why this is helpful. Let's add another strand generator. I will copy the length from the first system to the second system. Then I will bump up second system density. Actually, I will switch strand distribution to pass on disk, increase density now, and then increase the spacing. Something like this is okay. And I want to make this less uniform, so let's add the noise. Reduce uniform amplitude to 0, maybe increase per strand amplitude, and we have not enough points on those strands. So in the strand generation, I will increase subdivision steps up to 5, then maybe reduce the frequency of the noise. Something like this seems okay. So now one issue we have is that the noise is moving the strands too much outside of the boundary that I want to be this contained into. So I want the strands to be like in this area, and the noise is moving those strands away too far. And now this is where the first system with single strand can be useful, because we can force the second system strands to clamp and move toward this single strand in the center. So let's do this. In the second system, I will add the clamp in the former and nothing happens. It is because by default, the hair system is not linked to any other system. We have to tell the second system to be linked to the first one. We can use a tag for that. So I will tag first system with f tag. And in the second system, I will use the same tag f as parent in the parent column. So you see now the clamping is working. You can change this effect like so. Influence range, change it like this. And maybe add some randomization to the clamping strength. Something like that. And now the noise is not as strong and not without clamping. Without clamping and with clamping we have this effect. Okay, so now I want to add one more system. So let's maybe rename this system as virtual parents, because this system will be parent for the next one. So let's add strand generation again, bump up density. This time it will be very dense, and I want to interpolate this third system toward the second one. So again, I will use tag. This time I will use VP tag for virtual parents, and then in the parent column in the third system, let's use the same VP tag. And interpolation is already working. If it is not working for you, then go to the strand generation, make sure the interpolation is enabled. And let's add the clamp effect again. We do not have enough resolution, so let's bump up the strands density subdivision steps to 5. And we will play with maybe the clamp settings. I could add maybe randomization again on top of that. And on top of that I will add offset gain. Let's say it is looking good enough. So one maybe thing I want to tweak is that the ending is kinda uniform looking. I want to add some waviness. So I will add the curls deformer, reduce the frequency, maybe even more. And then I want to move this only to the endings. So I will increase the influence range like this. It is almost working okay. Let's see, using the parent space does not change much, but I want to randomize the frequency so it is not so uniform. So let's randomize this, and in the randomization let's use parent IDs. Play with the seed, and I would say it is looking good enough for this purpose, and maybe reduce the frequency slightly more. And now I will want to probably duplicate this system one more time to create another bake setup. So let's duplicate this, and now if I change some settings, you see both of objects are changing. It is because all those systems, when I duplicated object, were linked. So you see by number 2 next to them, meaning two objects are using the same system. I will make unique the third system. Actually, before that, I will undo, rename this to dance child, so it will be easier to know what is going on. I will make this unique, and then maybe play with the frequency of the curls, change the seed, and it is kind of looking different, but still some spots, especially in here, you can see it is the same setup. So one way to break the even look without making the virtual parents unique is to, for example, go to edit mode, select all the source faces with A key, then scale this slightly in the X or scale in the Z direction. So let's see. So for example, this looks kind of better. And one last trick is to maybe move this to the side in edit mode until you like something that looks okay. Now jump out of the edit mode and move this object mode closer. So you see, even though most of the subsystems are shared, this is looking quite different from the original one. And we can repeat the same steps. So I could move this to the side, make the dense child unique. This time I will reduce the density of the strands, something like this. Change maybe the curls frequency again. Maybe I will actually change the face, like that. It is still looking a bit similar to the one in here, so I will go to the edit mode, scale this, move this more to the side, maybe this time to the right. Something like this. This is like cheap way to make it work. And let's duplicate this last time. Again, I will make the dense child system unique and reduce the strands density. Then maybe scale this slightly, move this to the side. And okay, let's say it is working for the purpose of this demo. And now some of the systems are still shared. So for example, the finalize is disabled, but I can enable the finalize, and it is shared between all those systems. And what this does, it is not actually generating any new strands, it is just affecting all the strands generated before. So in the finalize there is the trim deformer, and it is actually cutting randomly some strands length. So you can tweak this to your liking to get more randomization. And since this finalize is shared everywhere, you can tweak this only in one place and all other objects are affected. And there is also radius set for tapering tips and radius set for tapering roots. And for example, let's say we have also those virtual parents shared. And I do not like how all those strands are ending more or less in the same spot. So I can tweak that on all objects by just tweaking the virtual parents. So in here I can add the trim deformer, then randomize the tip trim, and you see we just randomize all the objects in one spot without having to manually go to and add trim deformer to one object, then to the second object, then to another object, then to another object. Thanks to the shared settings, we can do this only in one system. You can think about those as just modifiers that are shared between objects. So now we can bake this to the textures. I can select the opacity, root map, depth map, select the output path, and then press bake. And after a few seconds, we should see the result on the preview system on the right. So I will enable the EV viewport. This is the result of the bake, and I will adjust the settings on the long strands. So I will reduce the spacing, and the one problem is that the previous system on the right is using old UV layout, and the texture layout has changed. So we have to adjust and update the layout of the UVs on the previous system. I will go to the UV editor. Let's open one of the bake textures, and on the top bar there is this hair UV. Press that, and now you can drag by the corners of those green boxes to match the size of the new textures. And if you want, you can just hover your mouse over box, press delete to remove UV box, the size this one, enter to accept, and it should now look okay. So let's jump to the hair baking setup. Maybe I could increase the width slightly, and we get something like this. And let's maybe transfer now this bake and to the character. So in here in the profile settings, we are using this preview material, and also I edited this UV data free. So I do not want to create those UVs from scratch again for the character. So just remember, we are using this UV data free. Let's jump to the main scene. And in here, I will go to the shading, and in the profile section, I will change the material to preview. I will change the UV, so we were using UV data free. So now this is looking correctly, except some shading issues. So let's jump and edit the preview material in the shader editor. And if you have shading issues, this is usually by the wrong normals. So let's see the normal. This time I did not bake the normal map, so we have just to unlink this, or we could bake normal pass, but I will just unlink the normal pass. This should fix the shading. It is looking okay. We could maybe add some depth by increasing the multiply factor. So this will multiply the base gradient color with the depth pass. And yes, I think that covers most of the setup of the baking. Maybe the last thing I wanted to show about the baking is how to maybe guide those strands with curve, because currently everything is procedural and you cannot comb any of those strands since everything is just generated one by one procedurally with some noise. So there is an option in hair system setup to plug in guide curve. Let's create a guide curve first. Let's use the hair drawing option, enable hair drawing, and we will want to draw starting from this position where the source plane is. So just hold D and start in the top. Hold D, left click and drag, and this will create the strand. This is kinda simplified too much. So in the section of the reduction, we'll reduce this not as much. I will reduce this only maybe 10%, so we have more detail in the stroke, in the curve. So let's do this one more time, and maybe 2 more times. Okay, so if I switch to solid view, we have a bunch of those strands painted. I can go to the object info data, rename this new strand to drawn guide, copy the name, and we can now use this object name on the hair system. In the disable drawing, let's jump to the hair system setup section, and we can now paste the name of the object as guide. And it does not look great, so it is because I will remove this for now. It is because the drawn strands have the flat profile attached, and because of that, those strands are not seen as the curve, they are seen as mesh. They are seen as a ribbon mesh, and to fix that, we can change the profile of those strands. So we can go to the profile section, switch this to no profile, and this time this will be seen as curve by the hair system. So let's jump to the hair system, guide curve, paste the name, and now it is working okay. except none of the hair systems is using this curve, since we have to tell one of them, all of them, to use this curve based on the tag. So the tag for the Dravn-Gain curve, the tag is called base. You can name this whatever. And we have to paste this tag, for example, and tell one of those systems to follow this base tag Dravn strands. And in my case, I do not need the single strand any longer. I will get rid of this. And I will tell the virtual parents to follow this base tag. Now take into account the virtual parent is shared between all those 4 objects. You can see if I change virtual parent tag to base, now it is messing up the systems on the left, because they do not see any base tag. They do not have any guide curve assigned. So I will undo this, and I will first make this virtual parents unique. So this is no longer affecting other objects. You can paste the base tag and enable this. And something is happening, but it is not looking great. Now there is this warning icon showing that possible cyclic dependency detected, and this is because the Dravn strands are depending on this plane with hair system attached, and hair system with the plane is dependent on the Dravn guide object. So there is cyclic dependency. And the guide curve is depending on the plane with hair system, and hair system is depending on the curve. And the way to fix this, it is mentioned in the tooltip. Use Ctrl-Shift-H, transfer hair system to guide curve. This will fix the issue. And let's see if the virtual parents have the interpolation enabled. So yeah, they are interpolated correctly toward the base tag. And if I comb the system, so when I use the transfer in the outliner, I can show you that the hair system is now attached to this Dravn guide object, curve object. So it is no longer attached to this plane. However, this plane is still used for sparking of the strands. Well, anyway, I can now go to the sculpt mode, enable draft strands overlay, and I can comb those strands. So yeah, it may be looking a bit complicated, but usually the faster way to create this kind of setup would be to select the plane, then enable hair drawing. You just draw a bunch of strands like that, and then you just add hair system on top, bump up density. So this is a way faster workflow. Add maybe the clamp. So we created new system like that. But yes, if you want, you can make it work also on the baking setup. And last thing I want to mention is that this system is now attached to the Dravn strands. So this is now on curve object. Those systems are still attached to the plane. However, we cannot see the plane any longer. Why is that? When I transferred this hair system from the plane to the curve, this automatically changed one option in the profile settings. In the profile settings, there is this draw source mesh option, and it was automatically disabled for this transferred system, so that we do not draw this mesh twice, one by itself and one time draw again on the curve object. So that's why this was disabled. But since the profile is shared between all those 4 objects, this also means that the source mesh was disabled for this object, for this object, for this object. It should not matter really too much, since we are not really rendering this plane anyway. But yeah, this is just something to take into account. And lastly, if something is not working, just make sure to update the add-on, since I just pushed some fixes to it. Hope you like this video and see ya.